The date is Saturday, December 12th, 2020. Our location, the White House, Washington, D.C., the United States. This is where our story today starts. A story that I believe is the greatest hack the world has ever seen, because an extraordinary event occurred on that day, and that event was initialized or kicked off by the NSA, the National Security Agency. The NSA in the United States of America is tasked with protecting the information systems, the networks and national infrastructure that rely on computers and systems. The NSA asked for an emergency meeting of the National Security Council. The National Security Council is the premier forum where the president will be informed and make decisions on matters of significant security concern for America. Why did the NSA call an emergency meeting, get the president in on a Saturday, and get the Joint Chiefs of Staff in? Because the United States was under zero-day cyber attack. This little session that we're about to dive into is about SUNBURST and SolarWinds. SUNBURST and SolarWinds, in my opinion, is one of the greatest hacks we have ever seen conducted. It hit many government agencies and many thousands of companies around the world. My name's Sean, I'm from nemstar.com, and I hope you spend a few minutes as we look through the story of this attack. And it is a story. This session will not be technical. We won't demand deep network or pen testing knowledge. This story is for everybody. Business owners, department managers, senior leaders, risk specialists. It doesn't matter who you are. If you use an IT system or a mobile phone, there's a message in here for you. SUNBURST and SolarWinds was an information security cyber attack that hit 18,000 customers and 250 US government departments. It is one of the most horrific hacks we have seen in recent years. The US Commerce and Treasury Department, Department of Homeland Security, the National Institutes of Health, the State Department. It didn't only hit US government, it hit over 18,000 private sector companies such as Cisco, Intel and Deloitte. During this session, I want to explain to you what exactly went on. We want to understand what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. Because if you can understand the story and understand the whats, the hows, and the whys, then there are lessons to learn for absolutely all of us. SUNBURST and SolarWinds completely changed the ecosystem in information security and cyber. It introduced us to new attacks, techniques we've never seen before, and it woke a lot of people up to one of the biggest risks we face today, because this is not a highly technical attack. What we're going to be talking about is a supply chain attack. For you to understand this little session, you don't need technical expertise or networks, but what you do need to understand is the process that a hacker goes through, the modus operandi. You don't need to be an atomic physicist to understand how a nuclear power plant generates electricity. If you understand the process, you can understand how a nuclear power plant works. A radioactive reaction causes heat, which we use to boil water. When water boils, it turns into steam. Steam takes up more space than water does. It expands, and we use that expansion, that pressure, to drive turbines. Turbines drive generators, which create electricity. You don't need to be an atomic physicist to understand the basic principles of how a nuclear power plant works. You don't need to be a pen tester or a deep technical person to understand how SUNBURST and SolarWinds works. But you do need to understand the modus operandi. You need to understand the techniques that the hackers use. We actually call this TTPs. Bad actor, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And to understand it, we break it down into simple steps in a process. The steps are called a hack chain. And there are many different sorts of hack chains available on the internet today. Different ways that you can break down that process. You can break it down into 2 or 3 steps, or you can break it down into 14 steps with many subsections. My favorite hack chain is called the MITRE attack chain. It uses 14 separate things, but it's very detailed and very complex. Our hack chain will have 3. Every single attack, every hack, every cyber exploit always starts with the same thing. And that thing is a vulnerability, a weakness, a chink in your armor, a mistake that somebody made. Vulnerabilities can be absolutely anything. It can be a line in code. It can be an employee who's too helpful. It can be a mistake in a process. It can be CCTV that's not working properly, or it can be trusting your vendors and suppliers. Vulnerabilities are weaknesses, and all attacks start with the hacker discovering what your weakness is. Once they know what your weaknesses are, their goal is to exploit them. There's not much point in knowing that Superman is vulnerable to kryptonite unless you have a piece of kryptonite. You need an exploit. Vulnerabilities lead to exploits. Exploits give hackers a way in. They give them a foothold. It's the first step in an attack. An exploit delivers code, commands, whatever it is I want to accomplish. Exploits are used to deliver payloads. Payloads are actually the dangerous part of an attack. If an ICBM missile is the delivery mechanism, the payload's the little pointy bit on top that contains your nuclear, biological, chemical, conventional, or hybrid system. It's exactly the same in hacking. The goal of the exploit is to deliver a payload. The payload accomplishes the hacker's goals. One of the most common payloads is a backdoor. It gives me remote access to your system. Spyware allows me to spy on you. Ransomware encrypts your data and blackmails you for the keys to gain access. There are hundreds of types of payloads that can steal passwords, steal your bank accounts, give me remote access. Payloads are the dangerous part of an attack. When you combine a vulnerability with an exploit to deliver a payload, most people would call it a hack. The 3 phases that we go through are called reconnaissance, weaponization, and pawning. Those are the language of pen testing. We would take a vulnerability, and to find it, we do reconnaissance. We weaponize the vulnerability into an exploit, and the exploit delivers a payload. These are the things I want you to think about as we understand and dive a little deeper into the timeline of SUNBURST and SolarWinds. What was the vulnerability? Do you have that vulnerability? Does your business have it? How did they exploit the system? Would you be able to detect it on your networks and your systems? And what payload did they use? These are the questions we need to ask to understand and learn lessons from the greatest hack the world has ever seen. SUNBURST and SolarWinds was called a zero-day attack. A zero-day attack is one that we do not know anything about. We do not know what the vulnerability is. We do not have a warning. We do not have an antidote, a cure, a patch. We do not have an IOC, an indicator of the compromise. Security researchers and threat specialists, SOC teams and SOC analysts, they spend their lives looking for IOCs, telltale signs that something isn't right, indicators of compromise. The very definition of a zero-day was COVID SARS-19. The reason why it caused so much death, suffering, and misery throughout the entire globe is because it was a zero-day. Your control, your immune system, didn't know what it was and did not know how to respond. SUNBURST and SolarWinds We couldn't detect it. We didn't know what it is. We didn't know how they did it. 0 days are the things that keep information security and cyber professionals awake at night. They're the ones that we dread. 0-day attacks. This was a 0-day attack. We're going to split this story up into 3 parts now. The first thing we're going to do is jump to the end of the story. In part 2, we're going to take a look at Sunrise. What actually happened? So we want to see what the results of this attack were. Once we understand what happened, we'll go back in time and we'll go back to the very start to learn how it happened. And if we understand what happened and how it happened, the last stage will be to understand the business impact and the financial cost, because if we can understand the what, the how, and the why, we can learn lessons. And there's lessons for us all in this story. Part 2, Sunrise. This starts at T0. It starts at ground zero. The first thing that we knew was on the 8th of December 2020, a security company called FireEye, one of the most respected and reputable security companies in the world, their SOC, their Security Operations Center, had a warning, an alert. The burglar alarm on their network went off. Something isn't right. An indicator of a compromise was discovered. FireEye's network, as you would expect from one of the most well-respected security companies on the planet, was incredibly secure, and they were monitoring for abnormal statistical patterns, and they found one of them. Just because we found it doesn't mean we know anything about it. When we find a new attack that we don't recognize, we do intrusion analysis. Intrusion analysis is taking the attack apart and working out how it works. It's almost like a genetic sequence. We need to understand the genealogy, how it works, what does it do. It took FireEye 3 days to work out this was a real attack. And not only was it a real attack, their network was infected. And not only was their network infected, they traced it down to one single software vendor. SolarWinds is a software vendor. They write various different software packages that are used by millions of organizations around the world. Their tools are famous because IT people use them on your network to manage the network, to gain visibility of the network, and to centralize the control of all your systems. They hacked one of your software vendors. The software vendor was called SolarWinds. When they confirmed the attack on T+3, they issued a new IOC. They told governments and security agencies, they told the public, there's a new threat, there's a new actor on the ground, you need to look for this IOC. We all started to look for it. This happens on a regular basis. We can get hundreds of new IOCs each day of the week. And most of them are minor or negligible. This one wasn't. Because when the United States government, the NSA, started to look at all the public sector networks, guess what they found? They found SUNBURST and SolarWinds. 4 days after we discovered it, the National Security Agency called the emergency meeting in the White House. That's a serious step to take. The next day, things got even more serious, and they took an extraordinary step on the 13th of December. They issued Emergency Directive 2101, and by my understanding, this is a federal law that required legally an immediate reaction from all US government employees and departments. they went out, they created a law that said you must immediately power down all SolarWinds Orion products. Because SolarWinds was used throughout the American public sector, as it was throughout private businesses all over the world. One of their software providers was compromised, and because they used that software, they were compromised. T plus 5 days, T plus 6 days. The Security and Exchange Commission that runs stock markets in America says that if your company is of a certain size and listed on an American stock exchange, you must inform the stock exchange if there's any significant events happen in your company that could have a big impact on the share price. SolarWinds was forced to do a K8 report stating it has been made aware that a cyber attack has inserted vulnerabilities within its Orion network monitoring products. They had to admit they'd been hacked. On the 7th, on 7 days afterward, on the 15th, it was all over commercial media. CNN, the BBC, all the news channels were talking about it. There was a breaking news story. SolarWinds had released a security patch for its product. The security patch was compromised. A security patch is the antidote. Security patches are supposed to improve your security. Security patches are the things we rush round to make sure all your systems have. It was the security patch that compromised 250 American government departments and 18,000 companies. The security patch was the exploit. The security patch contained the payload. The payload was a backdoor. It gave the threat actor remote access to your systems. 15th of December. The list of victims starts to emerge. The US Commerce and Treasury, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Institutes of Health, the State Department. The next day, the list continues to grow. The Energy Department, the National Nuclear Security Administration. 10 days or 11 days afterwards, we have over 200 American government agencies, and we now have private sector companies. Companies like Cisco, SAP, Intel, Cox, Deloitte, NVIDIA, Fujitsu, Belkin, and even Checkpoint, the firewall company. This attack had hit close to 19,000 different companies, networks, and government agencies. This is why I believe it was one of the most advanced attacks we have ever seen. The greatest hack ever, maybe. 12 days after Ground Zero, after T0, on the 20th of December, they issued a statement. 18,000 of 300,000 customers downloaded versions of the Orion product that contained SUNBURST malware. Just think of that. How many software vendors do you use in your company? You have to trust them all. They didn't hack the US government. They hacked the software vendor. It was a supply chain attack. You trust your vendors and consultants, so that's who they were targeting. 3 months after we discovered the IOCs for this attack in Far Eyes Network, 3 months later, on the American US CERT website, this is the Computer Emergency Response Team for the US government and public functions. It's run by CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. 3 months later, this is their website. They're still issuing an alert, an APT compromise, an advanced persistent threat. Advanced persistent threat is an overused term. It means this is a serious compromise. You're not up against an individual. You're up against a well-funded, highly experienced, highly skilled team of individuals who have one goal in life: compromise your system. This really was an APT that targeted United States government agencies, United States critical infrastructure, and private sector businesses across the globe. 3 months later, that's still the headline on the US CERT website. The hacker group that did this is called APT29, Advanced Persistent Threat Actor Group 29. They had compromised the security patch for a product from a company called SolarWinds. The product was called Orion. 200,000 customers, was actually 300,000 customers use it, 18,000 times it was downloaded, 250 American State Departments hit. In April 2021, the UK and US issued a joint statement. They attributed this attack to APT29, which we call Cozy Bear. It's the Russian SVR, Russian military intelligence, had attacked and successfully compromised 250 US public sector networks and 18,000 private sector companies around the world. This wasn't any old threat actor group. This was a state actor. This is not my idea. This is not my opinion. The source is MITRE, and it's the US and UK government's outputs. It was the Russian government that attacked the US State Department and the Department of Homeland Defense. Again, another reason why I think this could be the greatest hack ever. So now we understand what a hack is. Now we understand what happened. So the real next part, the next step, is to understand why it happened. This is really part one. Solar flare, how did it happen? We know what, let's look at how. So we need to go back in time. How long did it take them to do this? What did they do? What was their process? Now this is only a matter of opinion, because for fact, we know that 250 US public sector agencies were hit and 18,000 private sector companies. That is not for negotiation. That happened. We know it was APT29, and we know the UK and US governments and various other agencies have attributed this to Russian military intelligence. How they did it? That's more about research. It's more about digging through open source intelligence and trying to work at a timeline. The research that I have done led me back to T-minus 23 months. It leads me back to January 2019. That's the first time any evidence has come up. Somebody, APT29, is trying to hack SolarWinds. It took them almost 2 years from the start of the project until we found out about it. They started to target SolarWinds, and it took them 4 months. At T-minus 15, that's when they accessed the network first time. Sorry, I said 4 months, 8 months, can't add. Okay, 8 months in, first access SolarWinds. It took them 8 months. A team of professional military hackers, highly experienced, highly motivated, well-funded, one single goal in life: compromise US government departments. Once they accessed the SolarWinds network, the software vendor's network, T-minus 15, the same month, they went straight in to attempt to inject code. They were trying to get into the systems and the software development processes, the people who actually write the Orion product. Coders these days use repositories. We call them repos, code repositories. When you write code, you keep the little bits of code you've written because they can be reused. And we create libraries of these codes. They're a little bit like Lego bricks. like little bricks that kids play with, and sometimes adults. You can build all sorts of things, but you don't have an infinite number of blocks. You can build all sorts of things with a finite number of blocks in a Lego kit. The way we write code is out of those repos. They were targeting the repos that were used to write Orion software. If you could get your code into the very building blocks, those building blocks are used in all sorts of different code within SolarWinds. And that's exactly what they targeted. T-minus 15. A month later, they had successfully done that. And what does any good software development team do when they've initial release? A good software team will test their software. They went in to quality assurance and UAT. They went into trial runs of the attack, months and months of testing. And when they finished the QA and UAT, they went into alpha and beta releases. They actually had done 2 months of attacks. T-minus 10, this is now 1 year, 2 months since the mission started. They now have 10 months before we knew it existed, they had a working, tested, alpha and beta released, proper compromise ready. They had written a new APT, a new advanced persistent threat, a 0-day attack. They went live 9 months before the FireEye network team detected the attack. They released, SolarWinds released Hotfix 5 DLL. It was made available to customers on the 26th of March 2020. 9 months before we detected it. 9 months before we knew it was dangerous. There's every possibility that this threat actor group had access to some of these customers and some of these systems for up to 9 months. In information security and cyber, we call that a dwell time. They had a dwell time of 9 months. SUNBURST and SolarWinds was a supply chain attack. They trusted their suppliers. It bypassed many security measures because the vendor you trusted had digitally signed the code as safe. And when you digitally sign code as safe, you don't do the same amount of testing and scanning. You have to trust someone. But it contained backdoor payloads. It evaded detection using some incredible new techniques. The Migrate attack framework, we had to add 7 new techniques that we'd never seen before into the Migrate attack framework because of this attack. It invented 7 new ways to get round our controls, to hide from us, to gain access to systems. It used a very advanced and novel DGA method, domain generation algorithm method. Later in our Masterclass series on our YouTube channel, I will be doing a technical teardown of SUNBURST and SolarWinds. So if you want to see what the DGA is and how it works, make sure you do tune in to the YouTube channel. It'll be one of our subsequent releases. But really interesting way to do command and control. It allowed the Russian government remote backdoor access. This is SUNBURST and SolarWinds. We've now covered what happened. We've covered how it happened. We now have to understand what impact it had, what operational and business impact. Because if we can understand that, then we're ready to learn lessons. So this is the third part, impact and learnings, the aftermath. So what impact did this actually have? Well, on SolarWinds, the company, it was absolutely devastating. They lost 40% of their share value within a week. And you can easily spot exactly when it happened. And you can see the share price plummet to depths. Now, it did recover slightly, but look at the entire trend of this graph. This is not a good trajectory for a company that was really well respected. I personally have used SolarWinds software many times, recommended it to many customers. It was a fantastic product suite. But their reputation was shredded. 3.5 million in immediate costs, 40 million in additional costs over the first 9 months. Shareholders sued them, got 26 million. And this is only one company. There was another report released from ARNet in 2021, and it released the fact that 70% of companies downloaded the patch were impacted. 18,000 people were impacted. 70% of 18,000 is roughly 12,600 companies had a significant impact. If each of those was an average impact of 12 million, that's what their research said, then we had 12,600 companies, each with a 12 million impact. This is a $150 billion hack. Perhaps the greatest hack the world has ever seen. It's a $150 billion hack, according to ARNet. That's what impact this one group of threat actors had on our global economy. $150 billion hack. We've learned what happened. We've gone through the timeline of how it happened. And we've tried to look at the impact that happened. So why? What lessons can we learn? What can you change? What can we take away from this? The lessons are pretty obvious. The most important lesson is assume it can happen. This happened to some of the most secure networks in the world, like the Department of Homeland Security, like FireEye, like SolarWinds. Their networks were not safe and secure. We know that for a fact. What makes you think your network or your phone or your system is more secure than FireEye or the Department of Homeland Security? If it can happen to these, it can happen to you. Do not believe anybody that tells you otherwise, because quite honestly, they're lying. Of course it can happen to your network. Your network has less security than the Department of Homeland Security or the National Nuclear Security Agency. Of course it can happen to you. And once you admit that this can happen, then you go to the next step. Tactical or technical solutions are not enough by themselves. You see, IT departments are good at deploying technical controls, but technical controls by themselves are never going to solve this problem. You need business resilience, and business resilience is a senior leadership team issue. Business resilience is about keeping your business going, achieving your strategy despite the challenges you face. Challenges will always come up to stop you succeeding, to stop your business succeeding. COVID, Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, inflation. There are all sorts of things that happen that can stop you making that number, creating and delivering that strategy this year. Business resilience is a senior leadership problem. It's about them understanding what the issue is and creating a clear and comprehensive strategy. You need a strategy, you need a plan, and it's the senior team that must deliver that plan. Because fail to plan, plan to fail. You see, if you assume this will happen in your network, then you approach the problem from a different direction. Risk mitigation is exactly what it says, mitigation only. It is not risk prevention. It is not risk elimination. It simply takes the amount of risk and it reduces it a little bit. That means statistically, there is still a significant chance that it will happen in your network. And if you assume that none of your controls are perfect, that all of them have got small bits of residual risk left behind, then you need a plan. And these plans are called playbooks. This is what your SOC does, your Security Operations Center. It comes up with plans of what you will do if the proverbial hits the fan. When the proverbial hits the fan, you need a plan. A playbook for ransomware, a playbook for zero-day attacks, a playbook for phishing, one for farming, one for denial of service. A SOC, a Security Operations Center, creates plans that we will follow, plans that we test. You prepare to be hacked. You do your best to prevent it. But that's not good enough. You have to run detective controls. You have to have systems that look for IOCs, IDSs, IPSs, SIEMs, EDRs, XDRs, and SOARs. These are our detective controls. And a Security Operations Center's job is to look for those little IOCs. And if we pick up an indicator of a compromise, you must have a plan of what you're going to do. Playbooks, plans for when things get bad. So, 3 essentials to close this little session off. Let's leave you with 3 little messages. Number 1, your senior leadership team must own this problem. They must understand the problem. We must make sure they have the right help, support, and advice to make the right strategies for the business. 2, you need an information security and cyber capability that's fit for purpose and adequately funded. You need expertise within your business. You cannot really ever outsource 100% of this. You need to understand the problem internally to even create an outsourced tender or contract. And number 3, you need playbooks. Playbooks are essential. They're your get out of jail card. They're your tested, proven plan that you will implement the next time there's a zero-day attack. Folks, thank you very much for your attention. If you like this one, make sure to like this and to join our YouTube channel. We're going to be producing more of these Masterclass series. If you want to, you can look me up on LinkedIn. The LinkedIn link is going to come up in a little second. But stay safe, folks, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.